So last week I went over 3 things I would love to see return from previous Battlefield games in the next game releasing in 2025. Be sure to check that one out if you haven't already. But today, in order to sort of counter that video, I wanted to cover 3 things I really don't want to see in this game, whether those are actual mechanics or even just the same mistakes they have made in previous games, returning to the upcoming title. So without wasting any time, let's get stuck right into it. Now, I'm not going to go over super obvious stuff like, for example, the specialists. We already know specialists aren't happening. It'd be very easy for me to make this video saying, I don't want to see the specialists return, but we already know that, and that is kind of the low-hanging fruit that I talked about in last week's video too. And so I'm going to kind of exclude all of that obvious stuff. That does not mean I don't want specialists coming back, because I definitely do not want to see specialists in the next Battlefield game. Now, the first thing that I don't want to see returning in the next Battlefield though is based on 2042, and this was the lack of a server browser, not only on launch but just in general when it came to that game. Obviously, eventually we did get one in Portal, but still in the base game, in terms of all-out warfare, there is still to this day no server browser, and that is, to me, one of the biggest issues that I still have to this day with 2042. Over the last month or so, I've sort of made my return to Battlefield 1 on PC, and it is honestly so refreshing to just be able to choose my own server. I can jump on, and I know that I'm going to have, say, 3 to 4 servers minimum to choose from. I can look at which map they're all on. I can look at how many players and stuff like that, and from there I can just choose the one that I want to play on the most, and it just makes that whole matchmaking system so much more enjoyable as a player. Now, it's not only that though, and it might seem kind of insignificant to a lot of people. If you're in the US, for example, or in most countries in Europe, it probably never really matters for you guys, but in smaller regions like Australia, for example, and there are hundreds of countries out there where the population is a lot smaller, it really does hurt us not having a server browser once the game is a lot less popular. Obviously, right at launch, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of players that are online at any given moment, and it means you can pretty much instantly get into a game. But after, for example, 2.5 to 3 years like we are right now with Battlefield 2042, not having a server browser can mean that if I wanted to jump on right now and play 2042, it can be kind of hard to play a game because you can't see how many people are in lobbies. It means that sometimes you're searching for a game and it might search for ages, and it makes you sort of think, okay, there's probably no one online right now, I'll jump back on another day and try again. Now, that very well may be true. Maybe there's just no one online to play the actual game, but it can also sometimes be, because there is no queue system, that every server that is out there is kind of just full right now, and so there could actually be thousands and thousands of players online just in Australia, but I don't know that because I can't see the lobbies. And so when I search for 2 minutes and nothing shows up, I kind of think, okay, well, there's no servers, I'm going to jump off and play something else instead. So server browser for me is a really, really important thing. Like I said, I know to a lot of you guys it may seem insignificant, and that's fair enough. If you're in America, there's probably just always games going on, but in smaller countries that just isn't the case. And even if that wasn't an issue, it is just still so much more enjoyable to just be able to go into the list of servers and pick the server that I want based on the map or the amount of players or the mode or whatever the case may be. So that's something that I don't want to see returning in the next Battlefield, the lack of that server browser. Now, before we get into the next couple, if you are new to the channel and you are interested in more Battlefield content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There is plenty more content on the way, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, the next thing I really don't want to see returning in the next Battlefield is the kind of over-the-top movement that we've had in the last few games, mostly when it comes to 2042, and I guess specifically to do with the specialists. So I guess that in itself, the fact that we aren't getting specialists, that will kind of rule this out a little bit, but I do just think the movement has been a little bit over the top in the last few games, and that's coming from someone who actually loves the more chaotic movement. So using 2042 as an example, the grapple hook or Sundance's wingsuit, for example, they did make the game just really not feel like Battlefield. And don't get me wrong, Sundance and Mackay, they were my 2 mains in the game, so I know it's ironic and I guess hypocritical of me to say I don't want them returning when they are pretty much all that I used in that game, but that's kind of my point. It felt like I needed to use them in order to sort of maximize the movement, because like I said, that's something that I do enjoy, the more chaotic, fast-paced movement, but it means that I kind of just always had to use those characters, and then not only am I missing out on a lot of the other specialists, but anyone who's using a different specialist, they can't use a grapple hook or the wingsuit, and it just made it all feel very, I don't know, very off, and it just didn't feel like Battlefield at all to me. So I think when it comes to the extreme like that, grapple hooks and stuff like that. I really don't want to see anything like that returning. But even just down to stuff like slide cancelling, for example, we've seen that so much in Call of Duty over the last few years. And even really in Battlefield 5 and 2042, the movement was a little bit sort of, I guess, cheesy in that way with the whole slide cancelling stuff. And again, I don't really care personally. I will exploit any movement mechanics that I possibly can. I don't hate it at all. I just feel like it kind of takes away from that more grounded feeling Battlefield experience of Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, where the movement was still good. It wasn't slow and clunky and stuff like that, but it just felt a little bit more grounded and meant that there weren't, slide cancelling demons just running around the map everywhere, especially when you pair it in 2042 with grapple hooks and stuff. It just started to feel like a completely different game than the Battlefield that we all know and love. Now, the final thing that I do not want to see returning in the next Battlefield is essentially too many ways to play the game, for a lack of a better word. Now, I'm not talking about actual game modes here. I think it's good to have more game modes, but I'm more talking about the fact that, for example, in 2042, we had the regular multiplayer. We then also had Portal, as well as then Hazard Zone. And obviously in the new game, we're going to have a campaign too. That right there would be 4 different sort of modes within the game, and that's obviously not including the actual modes within multiplayer. And to me, I just feel like that is a little bit too much for what we need right now in Battlefield. I think they really need to just focus on multiplayer first and foremost. Give us a really good Battlefield experience that feels like Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, that sort of prime era for this franchise. And obviously we're going to get a campaign too, so I think having a campaign is completely fine. But focusing on those 2 things first, and specifically focusing on the multiplayer, I think the campaign is still important, but if the campaign sucks, personally, I don't really care. That's not why I'm going to buy the next Battlefield. And so I think the focus should just definitely be on multiplayer first and foremost, so that they can sort of make sure they get that right, because obviously the last few Battlefields have been pretty disappointing, and I think we really do need to just get back to basics and finally, for the first time in what feels like a very long time, just have a really solid, pretty simple Battlefield game. Then, for example, 6 months later, if they want to add like a battle royale or whatever mode they want to add, I think that's completely fine. I'm not all for a BR. I think it would potentially take away from the actual core Battlefield game, like we've seen with Warzone for Call of Duty, but I'm also completely fine with them adding a battle royale. I'm a big BR fan, and I think Firestorm actually was really solid despite the fact that it was a complete flop, simply because, in my opinion, the issue there was more to do with the paywall than the actual mode itself. So I'm not opposed to getting a battle royale or something that is more in line with Hazard Zone again if it's done properly. I think it's fine to have more ways to play the game, but I just really think that they need to sort of focus on the actual core game itself, and then once everything's stable, once the reception to the game is good and stuff like that, that's when they can add that stuff down the line. Because I just think if they launch it like 2042, where there's kind of too many things going on at once, it just won't really end well. For example, with 2042, I actually enjoyed the premise of Hazard Zone. I played it a few times in my early preview before the actual launch of the game, and I enjoyed it. I was playing with a squad, we had fun, we actually won most of our games that we played, and it was good fun. And yet, when the game actually launched, I quite literally never once, not in my entire 2.5 years of playing that game, never once did I play a game of Hazard Zone, simply because when the game launched, the first thing I wanted to do was just play the regular multiplayer. And the same sort of thing happened with Portal. I didn't really ever play Portal that often, and that's not because Portal sucked. It's just because they all got added at the very same time, that being the launch of the game. And it almost meant that at the start, it felt like you had to kind of pick and choose what your favorite mode was going to be. So for me, it was always going to be Conquest and Breakthrough and stuff like that. And it meant that after a couple of months of playing, I kind of had no interest in Portal or Hazard Zone, because they'd also been out the same amount of time as the regular multiplayer, and I hadn't touched them once. So if I haven't touched them at that point, why would I bother touching them in the future? So that's something I really hope that they just don't do in the next Battlefield. Again, I'm fine with adding like a battle royale or whatever down the line. That's completely fine, but I just think doing it all at once is just not the way to do it, and I really do think that would take away from the actual base game itself. With that being said, I'm keen to hear all of your thoughts on not only the stuff that I mentioned, but also some stuff you guys don't want to see returning in the next Battlefield. So be sure to leave a comment down below and let us all know. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all out there on the battlefield.